It is March 31st, 2025, and Trump is apparently not happy with anybody as he has been lashing out at both Russian President Putin and Ukrainian leader Zelensky just in the last 24 hours. I want to go over the comments that Trump made, what he's saying, what he's threatening, and what that looks like realistically. Because if there's anything that we've learned about Donald Trump, it's that he loves to threaten sanctions, right? He loves to threaten tariffs and to claim that he is really going to take on a certain country, like in this case, Russia. But what does that actually mean, right? If the US decides it's going to put tariffs on countries that, in this case, as Trump is threatening, that buy Russian oil, what does that look like in the real world? And is there anyone who is going to comply? The short answer is no, not even the EU. So we are going to be getting into all of that here in today's video. But before we do, Jax wants to come say hi really quick. He has figured out the life hack that when he comes and hangs out with me and is a part of my video, then he gets a treat afterwards. Would you like a treat? All right, we'll get one in just a second. But he would also like you to know that your support makes my work possible. And so if you want to sign up as a monthly paid subscriber, you can do so right now over on my pages on Substack and Patreon. You can also send a one-time donation on my page on Buy Me a Coffee. I'll leave all of the information in the description below. I am going to go get the little man his treat, and then I will be right back. And I'm back. All right, let's get into the comments that Trump made on Sunday when he was on a phone interview with a reporter from NBC News. That's where he was quoted as saying, if we're in the midst of a negotiation, you could say that I was very angry, pissed off when Putin said yesterday that, when Putin started getting into Zelensky's credibility, because that's not going in the right location. You understand? So Trump there is reacting to comments that Putin made just last week, where he was bringing up concerns about Zelensky's credibility as the president of Ukraine. Because, of course, we all know that the 5-year term that Zelensky began back in 2019 came to an end in May 2024. And Ukraine has not held elections since then. So you have a bit of a crisis here for Kiev, and that they're now over a year past due from these presidential elections. Zelensky's staying in power because he maintains martial law in the country. And that includes a number of different powers that he is enjoying right now. And this is not the first time we've heard Russia bring up these concerns. In fact, Russia started bringing up these concerns about this time last year, if not even earlier, pointing to the fact that Ukraine had not had elections, Zelensky was not legitimate. And so this is something that Putin has brought up time and time again of saying, hey, we are not able to sign any kind of deal, any kind of agreement with Zelensky because he's not the legitimate president. So where does that leave Russia? With Putin's latest comments, he suggested discussing the establishment of a temporary government in Ukraine under the guidance of the United Nations and several countries. The aim would be to hold fair elections in the country. Putin noted that Moscow sees no clear way to sign any agreements with Kiev since other leaders might come tomorrow. Now, I don't know if Trump has figured out that Russia is stalling here. And it is completely within their right to stall, right? Let's be clear about that. Russia is actively winning the war in Ukraine. They do not need a ceasefire. They do not need a peace deal tomorrow. Now, they have made it clear that they're happy to continue to have dialogue. However, they're not going to make a deal tomorrow. So in order to get out of that without explicitly saying, yeah, no, we're not going to make a deal with you, you have Putin in this place of continuing to bring up the obstacles that stand between where we are now and a potential peace deal aimed at ending the war in Ukraine. And it's exactly what he's doing with this election business, where he's saying, hey, Ukraine needs to have elections. Why don't we get on that? Why don't we have and make sure that Kiev has a legitimate elected leader in office before Russia agrees to any sort of peace deal? If we sign it with Zelensky, who's to say that Europe can't just turn around and say this isn't actually legitimate, and then they continue on with some sort of version of the Minsk Accords where we have a bit of a frozen conflict, NATO rearms the regime in Kiev, And then we're back right where we are now with more war. And you can see Trump start to get frustrated here, as if he thought that because Putin was agreeing to talks, and that meant that we were going to get a peace deal very, very soon. I know there were reports going around months ago saying that they had an Easter Sunday or April 20th deadline for a ceasefire. So you have Trump in this position of kind of realizing finally maybe he's getting out of the denial stage of grief and a bit into the anger stage, as we're seeing with him lashing out. He's starting to realize that, okay, maybe I'm not going to get some done deal for Ukraine, some sort of full ceasefire by that April 20th deadline that his administration reportedly set for itself. But it also brings up the fact that Putin is not the only one who has raised concerns about the fact that Ukraine hasn't had elections. Trump himself, literally last month, was also raising concerns when he was speaking out and calling Zelensky a quote, dictator without elections. Trump himself was raising concerns that Putin is now also speaking about. Yet Trump acts as though he never made any of those statements whatsoever. I know he then followed that up with when he was asked by reporters about his comment that he made about Zelensky. He said something to the effect of, oh, did I say that? It's like, yeah, you did say that. You said that in a post on Truth Social. Maybe it was someone else writing it. Maybe they got the interpretation wrong. But the fact is that you are the president of the United States. You are responsible for the words that come out of your mouth and the posts that are made from your accounts on Truth Social. And if you didn't say that, you need to come back out and make a correction. But we have not heard a correction other than Trump's one comment during that interview, which I don't think necessarily counts. I think that's just Trump being Trump. But it is ironic that within just a few weeks' time, Trump literally goes from calling Zelensky a dictator, saying that Ukraine needs to have elections, to then deciding he's going to be the guy to stand up for Ukraine, for Zelensky's quote unquote credibility. And now all of a sudden, not only is he lashing out and saying that he's pissed off at Vladimir Putin, but he's also including threats. And he's openly threatening new tariffs, saying, quote, if Russia and I are unable to make a deal on stopping the bloodshed in Ukraine, and if I think it was Russia's fault, I am going to put secondary tariffs on oil, on all oil coming out of Russia. That would be that if you buy oil from Russia, you can't do business in the United States. There will be a 25% tariff on all oil, a 25 to 50-point tariff on all oil. Okay, so what does that actually mean? Because we have to remember here that it's not as if Russia is just some small country and there are just a handful of other countries that it does business with that import Russian oil. Oh no, Russia is one of the largest exporters of oil and also all natural resources on this planet. Therefore, when the US, when Trump decides that he's going to make threats like this, it really is just laughable at this point. Because we have to remember, as Al Jazeera reported in 2019, that 48 countries imported more than $123 billion worth of Russian crude oil. And while, yes, that was 6 years ago, that still includes the rest of Europe, as reports noted last month that the EU spent more on Russian oil and gas in 2024 at 22 billion euros than they did on aid for Ukraine at 19 billion euros. So for the countries that import Russian oil and that rely heavily on it, including the countries within the EU, I don't exactly expect them to just completely change course because Trump is now threatening a 25% tariff on them if they keep importing Russian oil. If they didn't make any significant changes during the Biden administration, I do not see them doing that now. And it would be better for Trump if he would realize early on that this war is not going to end overnight. It's not possible for it to end overnight. Even if Russia came out tomorrow, which I do not expect them to do, and they said, you know what, we're just going to draw the battle lines where they are right now, well, you still have serious issues that have to be dealt with, including, as Putin has noted, that we have to decide how are we going to enforce the battle lines that are drawn, right? How are we going to enforce the fact that right now, not only is Kiev continuing to violate the what was supposed to be a ceasefire on the targeting of energy infrastructure, but you also have the fact that Kiev is actively trying to launch a new incursion into Russia's Belgorod region. So I can see why not only is Russia not going to agree to anything overnight, but it is not physically possible to have any kind of peace deal, to enforce any kind of peace deal, and on top of that, to ensure that Kiev is actually going to do its part on its end, and then it's not going to fall apart, just like what was attempted to be a temporary partial ceasefire. Meanwhile, you have Zelensky attempting to capitalize on Trump's latest frustration with Putin, calling for tough measures against Russia to push Putin into a ceasefire agreement and insisting that Moscow couldn't care less about diplomacy. And yes, that is the same Zelensky who claims to have both a peace plan and a victory plan that literally involve NATO starting World War III against Russia. Not only is he not interested in peace here, but he's literally trying to drag Trump into more endless war, right? Put more sanctions on Russia, put tariffs on other countries that trade with Russia, as if that is going to force Moscow to the negotiating table when we all know that it's not, right? The media here in the West knows that it's not. And yet they still continue to play this game where they act like, oh yeah, there are other ways that the US could be putting pressure on Russia. Yeah, is it going to win them the war in Ukraine? No, they know that, and everyone else knows that too. Now, unfortunately for Zelensky, his moment of trying to get Trump on his side was apparently short-lived because Trump is also mad at Zelensky. Because as all of this is happening, we also have this forthcoming minerals deal that is supposed to be signed between the US and Ukraine, giving the US access to Ukraine's rare earth minerals. And we still don't know exactly what is included in that deal, but it's being reported that it does not include the years of security guarantees that Kiev is trying to get from Washington. And now you have Trump also threatening Zelensky, saying, quote, I see he's trying to back out of the rare earth deal, and if he does that, he's got some problems. Big problems. We made a deal on rare earth, and now he's saying, well, I want to renegotiate the deal. He wants to be a member of NATO. Well, he was never going to be a member of NATO. He understands that. So if he's looking to renegotiate the deal, he's got big problems. Trump. He has got to figure out how to handle this situation better, or maybe more realistically, because he cannot keep going around throwing out these threats of sanctions and tariffs and, oh, Zelensky has to do this and Putin has to do that. And my biggest question when looking at this situation is going to be, how long does Trump continue to go at this pace? Now, is it smart for him to continue talks with Russia? Absolutely. But when it comes to Ukraine, he needs to decide how much does the US want to be involved here? Because I do not expect them to pass any massive aid packages for Ukraine anytime soon. I don't think that the US has the capabilities, even if they are, to claim, oh, we're going to give Ukraine this amount of military aid and that amount of military aid. They're not in a place to fulfill all of those obligations, at least not right away. And so Trump is facing the question of how long does he want to continue to stay in Ukraine? Does he decide that the US needs to pull out now, right? Does he pull back on US support and allow Kiev to fall flat on its face and then point his finger at Europe and claim, oh, they are the problem, right? They're the ones who were supposed to be responsible for Kiev, and they did not fulfill their end of the bargain, and they could not handle things once the US pulled out? Or does he continue quietly providing military aid, quietly providing intelligence sharing with Kiev, and continuing these talks with Russia while slowly but surely figuring out that Moscow is not going to agree to a deal on the timeline that Trump wants them to? Because as we're seeing right now, Trump loves to throw threats around. Now he's threatening Iran, right? He's threatening Russia, he's threatening Ukraine. But what it makes him look like is the toddler who's throwing a temper tantrum because they didn't get the toy that they wanted. And they're surrounded by a bunch of, I don't know that I would necessarily call Ukraine an adult, but they're surrounded by some adults and some spoiled children, in the case of Zelensky, let's say, who are looking at them and trying to figure out, okay, when is Trump going to get with the picture? Is he going to at all? And at what point do his threats become meaningless? At what point does he become the boy who cried wolf? When he sits there and he threatens sanctions and tariffs and other measures against countries all over the world. And then you get to the point where it's like, okay, Trump, these threats aren't working anymore. You're going to have to find a new way to negotiate, and you're going to have to negotiate like an adult. Because every time that I criticize Trump's statements or I raise the statements that he's making, I always get comments from people saying, oh, well, that's just how Trump does things, right? He makes these harsh threats and then he pulls back once he gets some of what he wants. And this is just the negotiating process. Well, if he wants to continue like that, he can try to do that. But I can already see the ways in which countries like Russia, and this is likely going to be China at some point in his second term, when they're already getting tired of dealing with him like this. They're seeing past the way that he is trying to handle things, and they are already outsmarting him as he continues on with this game of checkers while a number of countries around the world are playing chess. And that's something everyone should be talking about. If anything in this video resonated with you, be sure to like it, share it with your friends, leave a comment, and as always, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to keep up with all of my work, make sure that you're subscribed to my page on Substack. That's rachelblevins.substack.com. That's where you'll find ad-free videos and new weekly episodes of my exclusive series for paid subscribers called Sanctioned. You can also check out Sanctioned over on my page on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Rachel Blevins. As always, thank y'all so much for all of your support, and I'll see you next time.